Very warm welcome to this Cosmos Seminar Series event. We're very happy today to host Eve-Aline Dubois from the University of Namur. She will give a talk that is entitled The Aeternitate Mundi and Their Echoes in Modern Cosmology Debates. So we will have a history and philosophy of cosmology talk today. Thank you, Eve-Aline, for being here today, and I leave it to you.
Thank you, Sylvia, for the opportunity to share with you my research. Today will be a bit special because it will be a mix between a previous state of my research about the modern cosmology debates and the study of the steady state cosmologies and their development and the other stationary cosmologies model, and my more recent research about the conception of eternity through times, and especially during the Middle Ages, with a lot and a lot of works on the eternity of the world. So first of first of all, I would like to speak about what is eternity and what do I mean by that. In fact, eternity could be considered as the dimension of time being the real line as a mathematical line with no end in the past and in the future. With the modern conception of cosmology, it's really, really hard to have a point of view and a scientific position about what will be the universe and does it have an infinite future. So I will not study this point. I will be focused on the eternity in the past and saying as the universe got a beginning, or as time have a beginning, as time got a beginning, or something like that. So we will be focused on the eternity, but in the past and not in the future. And first part of this talk will be the discussion in the 13th century, especially in the University of Paris, which was a very important place for philosophy and theology at the time. So when we are in the 13th century in Paris, you will have two really strong powers in action there. You will have the religious power and the kings and the law power, the state powers. And in fact, the university has chosen to be under the church power, under the pope power. And so like this, the student will be a corporation following the canonical laws and not with regard to the city police and everything like that. The university is officially founded in Paris at the beginning of the 13th century, and the organization is very clear. You have one faculty, the art faculty, which can be considered as the high school of modern time, of today's time, saying like it's really the basis that you have to learn, so math, grammar, rhetoric, logic, a bit of music, and a bit of astronomy, and so that's the art faculty. After that, you could follow another courses in law, in medicine, or in theology. And of course, theological faculty is the best one. The golden way is to study art, and after that, to study theology. And at the beginning of this construction of what could be a university, it made sense to do that because there were this tradition of learning the trivium and the quadrivium courses before studying theology. And it was easy to conceal Aristotle and the philosophical tradition with the theological tradition because in Paris and in the Latin Occident, we didn't have a lot of access to Aristotle. In fact, at the time, they only knew the basis of logic of Aristotle. So it was quite easy to teach Aristotle and saying after that, you know how to learn, you know how to express yourself, how to make a reasoning construction, and like that you could pursue your study. But at the really end of the 12th century and at the beginning of the 13th century, we will have access to more and more books, works, Arabic ones, but also Aristotelian one and philosophical one. And at the beginning of the 13th century, you will have this problem that there is so much more in Aristotle than just the basis of logic. And so the Faculty of Arts will start to change a bit and became a faculty of philosophy, where you will study Aristotle with some problem at the beginning of the century because there were some condemnation that you could not teach Aristotle, but you could read it. So it was quite easy to find a loop in the law and say, okay, I will not teach Aristotle, I will just read it, write some commentaries in the margins, and will give my book to my students. And I haven't taught it. Uh, so when I want to, when in time I want to focus on is the time where you cannot say Aristotle is just basic logic. You have to study it, and Aristotle is problematic with the theological faculty that you want to go after, the arts faculty. Because when you are studying philosophy, you must only use your reason, and with that you will follow Aristotle and trying to say that the universe is eternal, at least in the past. And when you will be grown up and go to the theology faculty, you will have to follow the faith and the truth of the revelation and saying, of course not, there is no an eternity in the past in the universe. There is a beginning of time thanks to the creator and the big God. And sometimes you will also say that there is the end of the universe because it's the apocalypse planned for the world made by God. And so we'll have this tension saying which way I have to follow to go to the truth. Do I have to follow my faith or do I have to follow my reasoning? And in the middle of the 13th century, this problem will be really important for a lot of authors, and there were a lot, in fact, of works entitled De Aeternitate Mundi or De Mundi Aeternitate or about the eternity of the world. And there were a lot and a lot of work. And it's really, really strange to study that because, in fact, the question was not open at all. You are at the time in a Christian Europe, and there is no question. Of course, God is the creator, and of course, the universe has a beginning. But it seems important for the author of the time to study the question, even so they already know the answer. And so I would like to present to you three important authors because they discussed at length the Aeternitate Mundi question, and because they are representative of all the spectrum of position that you can have. So in one hand, you will see Bonaventure. I'm sorry for the accent. I don't know how to pronounce it in English. And so Bonaventure is a theological point of view, saying there is no way that you could discuss this question. And the other end of the spectrum, you will have Sige of Brabant. Again, sorry for the pronunciation. I not even sure. I don't even know how to pronounce it in French, even if it's a Belgian name. And so Sige of Brabant will be the partisan of philosophy and reasoning, saying we have to follow our reason and abandon the faith. And in the middle ground, you will have Thomas Aquinas trying to make the good and the best for everyone and saying perhaps you can find a kind of balance. So, Bonaventure was really, really important at his time. Uh, really young, he became the Minister General of the Order of the Friar Minor, and so he has the control on all the Friar Minors community, and he has to defend theology and the faith in front of the university and their development and this kind of renewing of the Faculty of Arts, saying perhaps we can follow our reason and not our faith. So Bonaventure will say something really simple in one of the sentence commentaries. So at the time it was an exam that you have to pass, saying I will comment the sentences of Pierre Lombard. Um, and so in his comments, Bonaventure will explain why the world cannot be eternal, with a very clear development. First, infinite in act is impossible. This is coming from Aristotle himself, saying we cannot imagine infinity in act. Potentially, infinite is possible. You can always think of dividing by two or adding one, but in act, in actuality, you will never cross the reality of the infinite. And so, infinity in act is impossible. That's the first premise. Second one is really simple. If the world is eternal, then there is an infinite in act. And so with these two ideas, infinite in act is impossible. Then if the world is infinite, there is an infinity in act, the infinity of times, of all the moments, of all the instants. There is a contradiction. So, conclusion, the world cannot be eternal. And it's quite nice that Bonaventure is trying to defend himself and his position, not with arguments like it's written in the Bible, you have to follow your faith. It just, no, I will take the argument from Aristotle, I will make a good reasonment with you, I will follow my rationality, and my conclusion will be the world cannot be eternal. And so Bonaventure is not the only one to defend this position, but is one of the best figures that I could present today. And so it's the extremity of the spectrum about the question of the Aeternitate Mundi. In the middle, you will have this really important figure in Middle Ages, Thomas Aquinas. It's really important that you could look in his hand. He has the church in one hand and a book in the other one. And if you look at the book, it's not the Bible. It's written in other languages than Latin or Greek. So Thomas Aquinas will try to reconcile both tradition, the Christian one and the pagan one or the ancient one from the philosophers, and he will try to merge them, saying perhaps Aristotle is not a Christian, of course he's not a Christian, but perhaps it's possible to Christianize Aristotle and to find a way to satisfy the theologian and the philosophers. Doing so, in fact, Thomas, on the question of the eternity of the world, will have enemies on the both sides. So by putting himself in the middle, he will not try to reconcile everyone, but he will have everyone as enemies. And so this question in Thomas Aquinas was really, really debated and really strongly debated. About the eternity of the world, Thomas Aquinas wanted to distinguish the fact and the possibilities. Then there is the fact, the real world, and there is all the potentiality, everything could be like this. And so for him, the question that does the universe has, or the world has, have a beginning is not the same that could the universe be different? Could the world had no beginning? Because If you are looking at the facts, if you are looking at the truth, if you are looking at the way the world is, you have to say the world has a beginning. It's written in the Bible, it's written in our tradition, it's the fact of the revelation by my faith, so there is no question about it. The world has a beginning. But Thomas Aquinas will ask the other question. Could it be different? And in fact, that's a question, and this question is not in fact about the world, but is about God. Could God do something differently? And so he will study, and he studied the question of eternity, and so the eternal point of view or the temporal point of view, saying there is a beginning or there is not a beginning. Not as I'm talking about the world, but as a way to speak about contingency and saying, could it be different? And is there a very strong impossibility to think a world without a beginning? And he will say, we cannot say anything about that. It's impossible to make a proof about the world has to be eternal or could be eternal, because it has not, and it must not, or it's impossible to have a proof that the world has to have a beginning. So Thomas developed a very strong agnostic position, saying, I will follow my faith. I know for the fact that the world has a beginning, but for the question of the possibility, I cannot decide. With my faith and with my reason, the question cannot be proven. Doing so, he will make enemies on the two factions of the theologians, saying, of course, you can prove that the world must be like this is because God has the power. And he will have enemies in the philosopher position, saying, what are you doing? Of course, with the reason, we could say another thing. And in fact, to represent the very other side of the spectrum with a very strong position from the philosophical point of view, from the art faculty, I have chosen to speak about Sige of Brabant. So you see that every one of these three, they are contemporary, they cross their path in Paris, they knew each other's, and they knew their works. So Bonaventure attacked Thomas by writing, Thomas answered the same way between Sige and Thomas. So they knew each other. I'm not making something there. They were all of them in the same place in the same time, so they knew each other. And Sige of Brabant is not a friar, is not a Dominican, is not a friar minor. And so is a pure product of the arts faculty. And when you have finished the cursus of your art faculty, you can decide to go on in the other faculties, medicine, law, or theology, when you can become a teacher in the art faculty. And that's the trajectory of Sige of Brabant, saying, no, I'm a master of arts, and I will teach art, and I will stay in this faculty. And so he will teach philosophy. He will teach, and he taught Aristotle. I think Aristotle is very important for us. And so we say, I'm not a theologian. I'm not speaking about my faith. I'm not speaking about God. I'm speaking about the world as a philosopher. And at the time, philosopher was very broad umbrella term, saying when you are a philosopher at the time, you are quite something like a scientist today. And so I say, there is two ways of look at the world, and and I'm not a theologian, I'm a philosopher, and I have my own method. And my method is to follow my rationality, is to follow my mind, is to make reasonings. And so I cannot just say, I know that because I have faith. And of course, said Sige, if I follow my faith, there is no question. There is a beginning of the time. there is a beginning of the world, and the world is not eternal. But as I am not following my faith, but as I am following my reason, because I want to speak as a philosopher, I want to follow the masters, such as Aristotle himself, I have to think that the world is eternal. When I'm following my reasoning, I have the conclusion, immediate conclusion, that the world is eternal. And so, with these three authors, you will have the spectrum of the ideas in the 13th century. So just to be sure that it's okay for you, I just want to say something here, that there is no such thing as a double truth during the Middle Ages. This concept has been demolished from some years. It's not because you can say something with the face and something with the mind that there is two truths and they are not reconcilable. CJ will always say, following my faith, I know that the world has a beginning, but I cannot demonstrate it with my mind. And so this idea, I think, for me, and I want to demonstrate that, this idea of if you are following your rationality, then you arrive to the concept of an eternal world. For me, is quite of a new idea of the 13th century from the ancient philosophers, and will make the pop culture or the tradition of the history of science, of this idea. Because philosopher will become philosophy of nature will become science, and for years and centuries, if you are following your reason, you cannot ask your face to say which answer is the good one, and if you are following your reason, the idea of eternity is quite the conclusion of the question, does the universe have a beginning? And in fact, this idea of if you are an intelligent mind and you want to follow your rationality, then the universe is eternal. For me, this idea went from the 13th century till the 20th century. The 20th century, as you know, was a very specific century for cosmology and modern cosmology, because there is all these new data saying that the world and the universe is not only the galaxy, there were a lot of galaxies, and just after that, the Hubble's data saying, and the other galaxies are running away, so the universe is not only very, very large, but is larger and larger. Which led me to modern cosmology. And as I have put in the 13th century the idea of there is a spectrum between the eternity and the finite world, I want to see here the very strong position, saying on one side you have Georges Lemaitre. Georges Lemaitre will, I don't know if you can see my title in fact, but okay. Georges Lemaitre will say something like, there is a dynamics of the universe. So if I rewind the movie, if the galaxies are going away and away, then going back in time, they were in one atom of universe, as he said, and there is a singularity, and there is something called the beginning of time. And that was really, really hard to accept at his time. And that's why I want to introduce you to all these other authors trying to defend the idea that no. If you are a scientist, if you are following your rationality, you have to defend the position that the universe is eternal. And in my point of view, and what I want to show today, is that this idea coming from C.J. of Bourbon in the 13th century was so strong in the tradition, in the education, that all of them tried to save this idea of eternal universe. First, I want to speak about Arthur Eddington. And so Aeternitate will be not really important or bit, but it will not build any cosmological model, but he will make a lot for Georges Lemaître and trying to diffuse his work, saying you don't have to write in French, please write in English. But he will always have this kind of idea that there is a problem with Georges Lemaître's cosmology, saying philosophically, the notion of a beginning of the present order of nature is repugnant to me. And I will put the stress on the philosophically. For me, that's the sign that there is something in common between Sujet of Brabant and Aeternitate can say, no, 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 I can follow your calculation, I understand what you're doing, but philosophically, if I don't want to merge my faith and my science, I cannot follow you on this idea of a beginning of the present order, of the beginning of time and beginning of the universe. He was not the only one, as I will show, to defend this position. Perhaps you know that the first attempt of the cosmological content in Albert Einstein's work was to make an equilibrium status on the cosmological model he was reaching with the general relativity, saying, perhaps like that, I can just make the balance between gravity, and like that, the universe will be static. Of course, with Hubble's data, saying that there is a recession of galaxies, you cannot have a static universe anymore. But perhaps you could have a stationary universe. What a difference. A stationary universe is a dynamical universe, but with some constant, with some parameters remaining constant through time, saying we will preserve some quantities. And in one lost draft signed by Einstein and dated by a group of historian of science of the year 1931, Einstein made an attempt to have a stationary cosmological model and saying we will conserve the matter density, the rho, and we will try to have a model like this to combine everything and to have a constant matter density. Doing so, he will reuse his cosmological constant, lambda, trying to have the equation, and after that. Alas, in the draft, there is a lot of mistakes and a lot of correction by hand, saying, oh, I make a calculation here or there. And at the end, when you are doing the calculation that Einstein's have made, you are arriving at a de Sitter model because the conservation of the matter density is saved, but the matter density is null. So you have an empty universe as the de Sitter's one. And so the question is not there anymore. But you have these attempts to save the world and saying there could not be a beginning, so let's have something true during all time. Another model will be the Dirac's cosmological model. In fact, the Dirac studied the coincidence of the large number, saying if you are studying the relation, the ratio between, for example, the electrical force and the gravitational forces between an electron and a proton, you will have a large number, in fact, 10 to the 39 at the top. And if you are looking at the age of the universe as it is presented and the age of the size of the atomic time, you will have the same large number, 10 to the 39. And so Dirac will try to save this coincidence of the large number, saying it's not possible that we are in the perfect time in the history of cosmology, in the history of the universe. We are not in the perfect time where there is this coincidence. It must be something hidden, a hidden law of nature, saying there is those ratios, those relations between the big numbers must be constant through time. So this is the large numbers hypothesis. This will lead him to make a cosmological model. So there is first a little later in Nature in 37. And after that, in 38, Dirac published a complete cosmological model with the consequence of the large number hypothesis being that the gravitational constant is not a constant anymore, so must vary in time. And so there were a debate about his approach during the end of the 30s. And after that, it seemed that he didn't do any cosmological model anymore. Until the 70s. After the discovery of the CMB, after the discovery of the QSO, after the renewal of the cosmology, Dirac came back to the cosmological model he had built in 38, and he will work on it again and present it in several publications. I just put you one reference here in 74, and he will defend this idea saying, okay, we can make prediction about the variation of J and the observation and the measure that you could do with it on the universe. And so it's all models saying we must conserve something through time because I don't like the idea of a beginning of time. Another one to do so quite similarly, because also with the work on constants and with the variation of G, is Pascual Jordan, the German physicist. And Pascual Jordan will also study the conception of creation of matter. So Dirac will do a bit about it. And Pascual Jordan will has tried to specify the matter that you could create without a big problem in physics and saying, okay, we will need to create stars. Why do you need to create stars? It's because when you are looking around us, you could see old stars and new stars. So if there are new stars, it's because there is creation of stars. So for him, in his model, there is the creation of matter and it's spontaneous creation of stars. I just gave you one of his references because there is a lot of work, a lot of them in German, sorry for that, without any translation in English. Alas, when you are looking at the calculation and you are looking at the specification of the star that must be created in Jordan's cosmological models, you will have one problem, that the capacity of the stars are so huge that in fact is creating black hole and not star. So, but he could not say at the time. And he also studied other consequences of his model, like has the moon have got does the moon has got a atmosphere in the past or something. And of course, when I'm talking about stationary cosmology, I have to speak about the steady state theory of the expanding universe. The steady state theory is usually known to be created in three heads: Hermann Bondi, Thomas Gold, and Fred Hoyle. But in fact, there were two papers in 48 saying different things. In one of the papers, the first one, written by Hermann Bondi and Thomas Gold, the idea was to develop a cosmological model based on the perfect cosmological principle. Saying, okay, we can follow the cosmological principle saying that the universe is everywhere the same, but we want to add something that the universe is always the same. And that's why you will have something like a steady state, it's a stationary state, because there is a dynamic, but they must conceive a creation of matter to compensate the dilution of the matter in the universe. So they will, and they did, think about process of creation of matter, and they try to calculate and to determine the amount of matter that must be created, and in fact it's so tiny that you cannot even today detect it. So it's something very, very strange because they are trying to make something quite Popperian and falsifiable, but the falsification cannot arise because there is no way that you could detect the equation of matter they are thinking of. On the other hand, in the steady state theory, there is Fred Hoyle working with them. In fact, they were really, really close friends. But the first paper signed by Hoyle about his stationary cosmology, was not the steady state theory, but the new model for the expanding universe. And in fact, his motivation was clearly to reject the notion of beginning of the universe. For doing so, he will change the Einstein's equation of cosmology, and he will add the lambda, the cosmological constant, as a factor of creation of matter to balance the dilution of the universe. And so for him, you will have something like the conclusion of his work, one of the outcome of his work will be the perfect cosmological principle, but it's not the motivation as in the previous paper written by Mundi and Gold. For Hoyle, that was a very long-term work. He worked on it all his career till the end, and so you can also perhaps read some paper called quasi-steady state. So after time, through time, as the CMB was detected, the QSO was studied, there were the problem of the interstellar medium. Fred Hoyle had always change his model, saying perhaps we can explain the data, perhaps we can explain the experiments, and so it's not a steady-state cosmological anymore, but a quasi-steady-state cosmological model. But it's quite interesting to see that his motivation was all along the idea that the problem in the Big Bang theory was that George Lemaître was a priest. And as a priest, he was following his faith and trying to find the beginning of the time. It was not the case, but that was the interpretation made by Fred Hoyle. And so Fred Hoyle and all these other authors was following the idea that the universe cannot have a beginning. And that's why I want to present this today with you, is saying if there's a finite in one side and the eternal position on the other side, you could see this motion of balance between them, like a chandelier. During the antiquity, of course, when you are following ancient philosopher, you will say that the universe and the world is always identical, will remain the same, and so is eternal. With the monotheistic religion, I have spoken about Christianity, but it's true also with the Muslim and the Jew, saying that there is a creator God, and so the world is finite in time. You have a beginning, and in a lot of their space, there is an end of time. So the universe is closed in space and in time. From the 13th century, you will have the idea that philosophy, natural philosophy, and science must rely on rationality. And it's not believable to follow your rationality and to arrive at the conception of a beginning of time. And through centuries, I would say something like 7 centuries, this idea will remain in the tradition of science, saying you must follow your reason and say that the universe does not have a beginning. Saying it's okay, it was accepted by everyone till the Big Bang theory, where science itself establishes that the world is finite in time. And that, I think, was the problem. That was the problem because you have a 7th century tradition saying you have to follow your mind and saying that the universe has no beginning. And at some point, a priest will say something different, completely different, saying, following my mind, I must say that the world is finite in time and has a beginning. So I would like to thank you for following this talk, and I hope that I was clear enough. I know my English is sometimes a bit tricky. Just I want you to come back to your life with this idea that there is this tradition from infinity to eternity, and then back to finite time, but only since 1 century. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Eve-Aline. So we now stop the recording and start the debate.